if you're studying and you're putting in the work, but you feel like you're not learning as fast as you'd like to, or that you're falling behind, then this is the episode for you. So in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about how to learn. It'll be specific to physiotherapy learning, which is my background, but the concepts here are going to be relevant to most professions and vocations. So welcome back, everyone, to the Physio Foundations podcast, where we talk about the knowledge and skills that provide the foundation of expert clinical practice. So this is a solo episode with me, and this episode is part of a student revision series that I'm starting. And the idea is to revisit core physiotherapy knowledge and skills, starting from first principles. So today you may hear my dogs guarding the front door and barking, and you may hear my kids coming home. So I hope you enjoy the sounds of life coming through in the background. So the whole point of these episodes that I'm planning to do is they're going to be scaffolded to what our students are currently learning in their physio course, but also designed for anyone or everyone to listen to and benefit from. So this could include new grads, clinicians who want to refresh their foundational knowledge and skills, or experts alike. And the focus is not going to be on advanced clinical reasoning or cutting-edge research. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you can find plenty of advanced clinical reasoning and cutting-edge research on other episodes of the podcast and on other podcasts that are out there. But there's value in this. There's value in focusing on foundational knowledge and skills and reinforcing those foundations and reflecting on them. So what better place to start than the actual process of learning itself? Because without learning, we don't have any other foundations to develop. So we're starting with learning. By the end of the episode, what I really want you to understand is the difference between memorizing and learning. And I'll get to why that is soon. So learning does involve remembering and understanding concepts, but there's a difference between simply taking in information and memorizing it and understanding it and applying it and then analyzing and evaluating it and eventually creating new knowledge yourself. And of course, I'm referring to Bloom's taxonomy of learning there that you can read about, along with other models of learning. But we're not going there. What I want you to focus on in this episode is you and your own pathway from your university training or postgrad learning or professional training that you're doing at the moment, anything that involves learning. And what I want you to reflect on is, what's the real reason that you're doing your training? What's the point of it? And hopefully the point of university and professional training is not just about remembering facts and passing tests, particularly for the university students listening to this, because you can always look things up. You can always look things up and you can forget things and you can look them up again and reinforce them. What really matters long term is developing your thinking and learning how to think and how to learn. So over time, you can make good decisions and you can become an expert and you can provide people with high quality care and teach others. But it's not just something that happens passively. So learning is a skill. That will be the key concept throughout this episode. So the three things that I'll introduce in the episode. The first is the idea of learning as a skill, and I'll make the case for why this is so important, particularly in physiotherapy, but in any other area of learning. The second thing I want to talk about is the discomfort that you're likely to feel as you move from a novice learner to a more advanced learner, because becoming a health professional is not easy. And the courses that you do to become a health professional are demanding, and they have always been that way. And particularly these days, we hear lots of conversations, almost a form of denial, thinking about how hard the courses are. And they actually haven't changed, haven't become any harder. What may be more difficult for you is your approach to learning and some of the distractions that make it difficult for you, particularly as a novice learner. And I do have empathy for you. I do understand that it's probably harder now to do it with all the distractions than it used to be when we locked ourselves away and studied and learned. So the discomfort of learning is the second thing I really want to talk about, and how learning, when you do it properly, should be slightly uncomfortable, and that's normal. And we need to normalize that discomfort. And the third thing I want to finish on is practical strategies that you can use to study and learn more effectively. And it's not an exhaustive list. I certainly feel like this is a topic where I could bring guests on and get their practical strategies. I know I've done a lot of asking students and grads, mainly grads, to come onto the podcast and tell us about how they learned more effectively. And I know those conversations have been really valuable to me and to others listening. For what it's worth, I'll give you some practical strategies today that you can use right now to study and learn more effectively. And you'll find that useful whether you're a student currently or a new grad or an experienced clinician, because the learning really never stops. So before we go there, though, let's address a myth, a common misconception, which I touched on earlier. So this is the misconception that learning is mainly about remembering things. And of course, remembering things is a part of the process of learning, but they're the next stages where we need to apply and analyze and evaluate, for example. So the process of learning is different from the skill of learning. So one of the things you need to do when you learn is to take in a whole lot of new information and try to have a way of recalling that information. So how do we do that? So the typical format is lectures or presentations, a didactic way of presenting information. And so you attend a lecture, you read notes, you watch videos online, for example. And when you do that, the goal is to understand it, remember that content, and hopefully remember enough to pass an exam that's coming up. And that can be stressful. So naturally, we highly index on remembering content. And sometimes the context can be missing, so which makes it, ironically, really hard to remember things. So here's the thing. Here's a key message. Learning in this way, listening passively, trying to write down everything that's said and trying to remember it, is actually really difficult. So it's not just you, it's everyone. So why is it difficult? Why is it difficult to listen to a lecture and you get halfway through it and you realize that you've forgotten the first half, and you go back and start listening to it again and writing lots of things down, trying to remember things? Why is that way of learning so difficult? And the reason is because we don't store information in our brains in the same way that a computer does on a hard drive. It's not how our neurophysiology works. We learn through association. So we filter information really heavily based on our perceived importance of that information, and we create meaning based on what we already know and our emotional connection to the material. And that's why it's so difficult to listen to something and remember it out of context when you haven't applied it yet. So it's really difficult to muscle your way through memorizing large amounts of new information and then recalling it afterwards in an exam. So it's not just you, it's everybody who tries this approach. It's not you, it's the method of trying to rote learn things. And think about how you learn other things in your life. How did you learn to speak? Did you learn to speak through memorizing the dictionary and writing down every sentence that you heard, definitions of words, and then once you knew it all, trying to speak? It's a ridiculous example, of course, but you didn't do that. You learned through exposure, through listening, repetition, trial and error, copying, making mistakes, gradually improving your patterns of speech over time and getting feedback from other people. And so you're surrounded by language. You weren't doing it on your own. You've used language before you fully understood it. You had to go. And you're in a safe place to do that. And people talked back to you and iterated, and you developed your learning, and eventually you can speak fluently. And so it is with your other learning in life. That's why it's really difficult to sit there and listen to somebody else and try to write it all down and remember it, because it's out of context. So you need to be applying as you go. And this is why most health professions education courses are integrated. So we have the theory, and then you're constantly integrating that into practical clinical skills, for example, classes. And in summary, this is about repeated exposure, building those neuronal connections, gradually developing more understanding of a topic over time, rather than trying to store everything perfectly in your brain the first time you see it, which is impossible. So our approach to learning has to be congruent with our own neurophysiology and how we learn. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And that's why so many people report difficulties with adult learning, particularly with their first couple of years in university, which is inherently unstructured. And it's left up to you as the learner to organize yourself. That's why it's called adult learning. It's not school. You're in university, and your job is to develop learning strategies and to teach yourself. Your lecturers and tutors are there to guide you and provide an overview of the information. So it's really a polarity shift from school, where everything's structured for you. So this is a really important concept to understand for the novice learners who have just gone to university. Your job is to figure out how to learn, to teach yourself how to learn. And no one can do it for you, but we can work together to share strategies that we know are effective and to highlight strategies that we know are ineffective. And that's what I'm trying to do today. So most of the time, the issue isn't our effort or ability, it's how we approach our learning and how we structure our learning. So let's reframe this right now. From this point onwards, let's reframe learning from an activity to learning as a skill. So learning is not something that automatically happens just because you're exposed to information. So when you learn a practical skill, for example, assessing movement, handling a patient, performing a technique, you expect it to be awkward at first, and you expect mistakes, and you expect progress to be uneven. So why is it any different with academic learning? So with academic learning, we expect to listen to something without application, often out of context. There might be some examples in the lecture, but it's the first time you've heard many of these concepts. And we expect clarity straight away. And when we don't get it, we blame ourselves and we interpret confusion as failure. And in reality, confusion is a signal that learning is happening. So to learn, you have to be working at the edge of your understanding, and it's uncomfortable. So let's think about learning something that's not academic. You can choose your skill. So it could be playing the drums or another instrument. It could be learning tennis or another sport. It doesn't matter. Think about when you learned a new skill. And if you're realistic, you didn't expect to be good at it in your first session or in your first lesson. And you didn't expect to see somebody playing tennis and then pick up a racket and be able to do it just like they did it. If you did, you would fail and you would say, oh, that was unrealistic. And for some reason with academic study and with more abstract concepts, we sometimes think that we can listen to somebody summarizing a complex topic and that should be enough to understand and remember it, but it doesn't work like that. So we need to integrate what you're learning in theory into practice. So we say sometimes physiotherapy is an integrative profession. So we integrate anatomy, for example, biomechanics, physiology with communication skills, assessment, clinical reasoning. And we're constantly integrating knowledge and skills with that contact with another person. And as you learn, it's the same. We have integrated courses where you're learning the foundational knowledge, anatomy, biomechanics, physiology, for example, research, and then applying them repeatedly in different contexts with increasing depth. So early on in your study, it's not about mastery. And this is actually an adjustment for middle career clinicians who come back and do teaching for the first time, particularly in first year undergraduate teaching. Of course, they want to change the world and improve everything, and they have to make an adjustment initially where they realize that early learning in these years is not about getting to the level they're at. Early learning is about building those foundations. But particularly, it's about building the mental scaffolds. So the structures that your knowledge attaches to is a way of thinking about it. And it's hard. So at this stage, learning can feel really unsatisfying. It's uncomfortable. And there's a delayed gratification, there's a delayed payoff. And that's why I've said many, many times on this podcast, and my guests have agreed, or they've said it themselves, that some of the best years of your clinical career or your health professions career are after those new grad years. If you just stick to it, if you just stay at it, some of the most satisfying years of your career can be 10, 15, 20, 30 years after graduation, where you start getting that payoff from all the uncomfortable learning and all the uncomfortable work you've been doing. Attrition from the health professions is a major problem. And one of the reasons is this: it's hard work and there's a delay in the payoff for your work. If you stick at it, it just gets better and better. So back to learning. If you think about your curriculum and the fact that it should be integrated, so integrating theory and practice, so integrating things that you've learnt with, so remembered, facts you've remembered, with opportunities for applying them. For example, you might learn surface anatomy in anatomy class, and then you're applying that in palpation clinical skills in a prac class. That works really well. It really helps you learn your foundational skills to apply it and to see it and to teach others, to work together in groups. That's why our courses are designed in the way they are. But it breaks down when you get behind on your learning. So you turn up to a class where you should be applying theory and you haven't done the preparation, or you've listened to a lecture, for example, and you haven't really understood it and you can't remember it. So therefore, you're not really applying. You're just copying the person beside you. And we've all been there. So you fall behind on the theory. You arrive at a practical session trying to apply ideas you haven't really engaged with yet or you don't fully understand. And then at that point, the curriculum isn't integrated. You're just feeling like you're behind. And you're trying to practice without a theoretical base. And it can be really frustrating for you and for your teachers and for everyone around. So let's be honest here and talk about why this happens. It's not just you. It happens to most of us. And it doesn't happen necessarily because you're lazy, although some people may be. It happens to most people, even the people who are not lazy. And the reason this happens is because flexibility in your learning is harder than structure. Flexibility is harder than structure. Right? So your university years are actually more difficult than your high school years, largely because there's flexibility and you need to be running the show yourself. A good example of that is distractions. So you've got flexibility in how you approach study. What's going to happen? The hardest things are going to happen last often. And having a phone on your desk and in a bedroom, if you study there, I've never thought that was a good idea. I think a bedroom's a place for sleeping and other things, but it's not for study. Perhaps you can put your study in another area or in a library, for example, if you've only got one room in a small apartment, fine. But think about how you're setting yourself up for successful study. Another example is recorded lectures. They're really good for, having access at any time of the day and having this higher quality recording compared to a live lecture that's not recorded or maybe poor quality recording. Obviously, you can do them in your own time is the most common, it's the most common reason people say they enjoy these this format of learning, great. But suddenly you have to create your own schedule and deadlines and discipline and manage the distractions of doing them in your own time. And that's a learning skill that we don't talk about very often. We talk about it when things go wrong. When students meet with me and they're getting behind, we'll often talk about distractions and the need for a schedule. I refer students to our librarians. So we have learning skills advisors where they can go and develop study skills. And we have lots of resources to refer students to as well. And that's all good. But everyone has to be good at this stuff, not just people who have fallen behind. And most people don't go and make a plan. They just go and start studying and trying to remember things and then hoping they can apply them. So make a plan. Plan how you learn, plan where you learn, and plan to be distracted. Know that you'll be distracted. Another trap or pitfall is treating lectures as the content. What do I mean by that? So a lecture is a summary of an area. It's a guide to what you should be studying. It's not just something that you need to remember. And often a lecture being a summary is really just an introduction to the content, and the real learning comes from further reading. A really common strategy that many students tell me about when they get behind and they lament being behind and they realize that this is a mistake is that they feel they need to memorize everything that's said in a recorded lecture. So it's pausing, transcribing, writing down everything that's said, and thereby learning by rote. So rote learning. Rote learning is the use of repetition and patterns, mnemonics, etc., to learn concepts. It can be useful. We've all done it. It's actually a part of our wider learning, but it's not the only thing you should do. It should be a starting point for remembering important information. Let's pick an example clinically, the 5 Ds and friends when screening for VBI and dizziness. Yeah, good. Okay, have some mnemonics, have some ways of learning things by rote, but rote learning doesn't help you understand the underlying concepts. And it might be good the night before an exam, but because you haven't anchored your learning to meaning, it's also very easy to forget. So who can remember that feeling of knowing something really well for an exam and completely forgetting it? And that's because the learning strategy was late in the semester and it was also superficial. So we have to anchor our learning down to the concepts that underpin them. By the way, it's rote learning, rote, not rope learning, which I have heard. I think rope learning happens in Scouts. So rote learning, memorizing stuff by repetition, obviously a superficial strategy, and we can do more. Okay, so unfortunately, recorded content, really accessible, lends itself to superficial learning strategies, and you have to do something about it as the learner. You have to have a strategy for applying what you're learning there. Sometimes that's just group work. It's getting together with a couple of students who you work well with and teaching each other. Sometimes it's the classes like your tutorials, and if you're in clinical practice, it's doing that online lecture night and going and applying it in the clinic, then reflecting on it, where the real learning happens. So let's talk about lectures. If you're finished with university, you still may be engaging with lectures. You might listen to long-form presentations, recordings of conferences. Plenty of online format is presented that way. And you have to face up to it at some stage, don't you? So you sit down and you look at the screen, and it's a 50-minute recording on a topic. And the truth is, nobody can listen to a recording for 50 minutes nonstop and remember everything that was said. And at university, you've got multiple 50-minute recordings every week. There, I said it. No one can do it, and you have to do it. How's that fair, right? So here is the really important point about your lectures that will help you a lot. The lectures are overviews of the topic. So they're an overview of what you need to study. You don't necessarily need to listen to them and write down and remember everything from them. So the real learning happens when you go to your learning objectives and see what are the key things that are taught here, and ask yourself, is this a definition? Is it an example? Is it a reference? Is it referring to something else I should be reading? Or is it just a conceptual overview? When you finish it and you've got a lot of new information, stop, see if you can write down one point related to each learning objective, which is another point. Learning really happens when you start summarizing. You start chunking information into categories and you start making sense of it yourself. So the more active it is, generally the easier it is, and the less tired you feel when you're learning, the more motivated you feel. The more you look at other resources, so textbooks that we refer to and articles and diagrams, study the ideas deeply, and then teach each other, try to apply what you can remember without looking at your notes. And in the case of physiotherapy practice, this can happen in the clinic or in your clinical skills classes. You try to apply what you've learnt to your clinical skills or clinical reasoning. Then the final step, reflect on it. How did that work for me? What can I remember? What do I need to revise? So that's a bit of a scaffold there of a process of learning beyond just trying to remember things, hoping that you'll remember them. Here's something that's not related to health professions, education, or physio. Have you heard of the memory champions that can remember vast amounts of information? My kids, I don't know why we did this. I challenged them to memorize pi to 50 decimal places, and they did it really quickly, and I couldn't do that. They've got plasticity in their brains, but that wasn't why they could do it. Then I asked one of them, how did you do that? And he said, I thought about a snake. I imagined the number pad on a calculator or on your phone, and I imagined a snake going around in a certain pattern on each of the numbers. So all I needed to do was I was actually memorizing the pattern of that snake. And when he said that, I thought I still couldn't do that. But that was a process of learning that associated this abstract task of memorizing numbers that had no pattern and gave it meaning for him. So you have to develop ways of learning that work for you. So some of these, let's talk about learning skills, these core skills of university or tertiary learning or professional development. We want to be learning, not just remembering stuff. So some of them include just getting organized. So scheduling your learning, time blocking, these planning, putting time aside, putting distractions to the side, and having a goal. So this is not a productivity hack. This is a core learning skill. So scheduling, organization, time blocking. Foundational work, learning and studying. Oh, there's my dogs barking in the background. I'm sure you can't hear them. Foundational work compounds over time. All right, so being consistently a little bit behind changes how learning feels to you, and everything becomes harder and more disconnected. Conversely, foundational work, learning, tertiary education compounds positively over time. So if you do a little bit every day and you have that time set aside without distractions, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be good to be a health professional. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Consistency. You have to study consistently and reinforce the patterns. And when you get behind, just ask, just talk to each other. Don't go and sit in the corner and think it's just me and I don't understand it and everyone else is around me is smart. We're all the same. We're all roughly the same. We all go through the same things. There are lots of resources in universities for studying and learning. These are not my ideas. I'm just an educator facilitating your understanding of this stuff and giving you a summary. So you can go to experts, you can go to learning skills advisors. People have done their PhDs on how to learn. Don't just take it from me, but use your resources that are around you. Use each other, teach each other, get taught by your peers, by your mentors. Read widely. So this is a great segue into the last section, which is practical strategies for learning. So let's get even more practical. So if learning is a skill, what does that mean to you? How are you going to develop this skill to make learning more effective, to make it less uncomfortable? It should always be a little bit uncomfortable, but to make it less painful, maybe. So I'll give you 5. I'll give you 5 practical strategies. This is not exhaustive. There are many more. Come up with your own practical strategies for learning and see what works for you. I'd put it to you that these strategies here will immediately change your relationship with your learning if you can implement them, which is why you're listening to this. I would imagine that's why you're listening to this. So let's start with number 1, schedule your learning. Schedule it deliberately. So if curriculum that you're engaging with is designed to be integrated, if there's a structure to it that's recommended, the theory needs to be done before it's applied, just make it happen. Block time off, protect that time. If there's preparation for a class, unless there's too much preparation, then give that feedback. There should be a small amount of preparation for each clinical skills class you do, for example. When you do the preparation, you go in, it's a completely different relationship you have with the class and your peers and with the tutor, for example, and with your learning. It just feels good when you're prepared. So don't let your theory get behind the application. And if the recorded lectures you're taking use 7 or 8 hours per lecture, the harsh truth is you're doing it wrong. Yes, it can be really challenging when you're a novice learner. I have the utmost respect for you if you're studying physiotherapy in a language other than the language you spoke at home when you were young, and languages other than English, and the course is taught in English. Respect. And it's hard for you. At the same time, if you're spending 7 or 8 hours on a 50-minute recorded lecture, you are doing it wrong. You have to be more efficient than that, and you probably have to look more top level at the most important priorities that are covered in this recorded lecture. And do that well first. And then try to come into the classes prepared and apply it. You have to sleep well as well. You can't be doing 7 or 8 hours per recorded lecture. Limit that time. Do the most important concepts that are listed in the learning objectives. Do them first. And then put it aside. Make sure you get a good night's sleep and come in prepared. This is organisation, is point number 1. Point number 2, I've already covered. Use your lectures, your recorded material, your foundational knowledge that you're getting as a map, not as a textbook. Textbooks are 300 pages long. Textbooks are filled up with information that a lot of it you don't need initially. It's every bit of information you need. And that's why you have a lecture, to summarise the most important information, to give you a map to the information you need initially to get your foundational knowledge and skills and get enough that you can graduate and start practicing. You don't have to memorise everything. Otherwise, we just hand you the textbook. So watch for structure. Look for key ideas and concepts. Take note of the way things are explained. And then go, okay, I understand it conceptually, kind of makes sense. Put the lecture aside and then go and study the source material properly. So don't turn summaries of things into a primary resource. Remember, if you're summarizing the transcript of a lecture using AI and then reading that, you're now reading a summary of a summary. Go and read the primary resource. Go and read the textbooks and the articles and make your own decisions. Learn it yourself. Now, number 3, don't let good be the enemy of perfect. So aim for familiarity, not perfection. This can really help you with point number 1. Point number 2, which is use lectures as maps, not textbooks. All right. So if you find you're spending 7 or 8 hours revising or rote learning your way through a recorded lecture, a way out of that is to think, I just want to get an overview of this topic and be familiar with it. I don't have to know everything, but be familiar with it before I move on to the next thing. So some questions you can ask yourself to check whether you're doing this. You can ask yourself, is this clearer than it was last time I looked at it? Does it make a little bit more sense? Rather than asking yourself, do I understand everything? Will I get 95% or 100% in a test tomorrow if I did that? By the way, the harsh truth is when you get to doing assessments in university, they don't matter as much as you think. It feels like they matter very much. Of course, if you're trying to do a course specifically to get into another course, of course, the grades matter. I used the grades for my master's qualification, not undergrad, to get into my PhD. But that was only a part of it. I also used relevant work experience, publications, and other things to boost my score to get into the PhD. So it's more about the learning than your marks on your exam. And by the way, getting 75% average in a university, in a challenging university course like physiotherapy is considered excellent. It's completely different from your entrance rank or ATAR or whatever it is in your country, your ranking of your high school marks. It's completely different. You don't need to have 97, be in the top 97 percentile of your state or your country when you're in university. You have to be competent, safe, effective at a new graduate standard after 3 or 4 years. So it's a different goal. So guys, your exams, try hard, do it, work hard, but don't lose sleep over them. Put the work in, and your marks don't mean as much as you probably think they do. I know that's paradoxical. I've done a whole episode on this with Jodie Daykick that you can look up. I can't remember its name, but it's in the archive. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Number 4, again, I've covered this already. Expect it to be uncomfortable. Feeling slightly confused often means you're stretching your understanding. You're on the limits of your understanding, and that's a sign that you're going in the right direction. So just accept it a little bit. If it's really painful, 7 or 8 hours of listening to a recorded lecture of me is very painful, I expect. You're probably doing it wrong. So it should be slightly uncomfortable. It should feel like it gives you a little bit of a buzz to learn as well. If you're in the right course, if you really want to be doing this, it should all be a little bit exciting, and you should have some curiosity, but also a little bit of confusion and discomfort is normal, and it means that you're stretching your understanding. And number 5, this is really important. Everyone finds it difficult, but when we get behind, that's where things can compound. If you get more than a week behind in a weekly curriculum, like a full-time course, that means when you're listening to the content or you're learning the content from week 3, for example, you're still kind of thinking about week 2 and trying to catch that up. So when you get behind, that's the time to ask for help. So you've got learning skills advisors, you've got lecturers who these days are so approachable. We've all got emails and we're all very happy to help you. And far too often students wait until it's way too late or they've had a poor result before they ask for help. So your learning skills advisors, your study tools, your websites, resources, each other, your tutors, your lecturers, these are not the place to go when you fail or when you're really behind. This is the place to go before that happens, before you start struggling, to make a plan. So serious learners will make a plan and kind of expect things to be difficult and put a plan in place. So let's summarize. If you remember only one thing from this episode, let it be this. Learning is not just about remembering information. It's about developing your ability to think. So if I summarize the episode into 5 key ideas, learning's a skill that improves with practice. Number 2, confusion and discomfort is often a necessary part of learning. Number 3, early work in advance of when you get behind. That early work you do builds solid foundations, that scaffolding for learning. And it's not about mastery in the early days. It's about being good. Be good enough. Number 4, organization and discipline are themselves learning skills. Get organized, get a plan. And number 5, obviously learning continues throughout your career. So if you've listened to this podcast before, you know the final thing I say, right? So good luck with your studying, professional development, and lifelong learning. There's a reason I say that. It's not just about studying in university. There's also that professional development you should be doing the whole time, and then the overall concept of lifelong learning. So as you move from that novice learner, just out of school or just out of another course, to an advanced learner, your understanding deepens and your confidence grows and your judgment improves. But this is not something that just happens through reps. It's something that happens through reflection. So that's why thinking about learning as a skill is so important in your physiotherapy practice, and not just in university, but across your career. It's a skill that you've got to develop. So if you're a student, think of this episode as revision, hopefully some guidance, structured planning for what you do, not something that you're going to obviously memorize. Practice what we preach here. Think about these concepts as your understanding grows and as you move from a novice to an advanced learner. If you're a graduate or a clinician, hopefully this reconnects you in some ways to the foundational ideas that underpin your practice. And there's more where this came from. As I mentioned before, I feel like doing this or exploring these concepts with other people. I know so many good people who have so many good tips on learning and studying and will add so much here. And they're only a text message away from coming on for a half an hour chat, and then we'll have a really valuable episode. So no promises. I don't like to plan everything too much. I like to be fairly organic, but I'm thinking about putting that together. So I'm looking forward to that. Stay tuned. But in the meantime, please let me know what you think of that episode. I do really appreciate the feedback I get from you about these episodes. So just let me know. You can email me, but you can also share the episode with a friend. And if it helps you, it may help them. And that's the only reason I'm doing it. There's obviously no sponsorship. It's a part of my role at Monash that I do this, but it's also just me and the valuable guests I have trying to reach out to you and make the world a better place. As I've said many times, this is all about positive messages for our profession. So I hope you're enjoying it. So until next time, thanks everyone, and good luck with your studying, professional development, and lifelong learning.